Amid a glamorous Los Angeles, where Hollywood lights cast shadows over luxurious boulevards, there exists a land that never appears on tourist maps. That place is Skid Row, a parallel world existing right in the heart of the city. Here, charity groups become a steady pulse. They come to bandage wounds, distribute hot meals, and pull desperate souls away from the cold sidewalks. But Skid Row is not the backdrop of some bleak movie. This is where sidewalks are littered with trash and scattered needles, where makeshift tents of plastic tarps and cardboard stretch across entire blocks, where a different law of survival reigns. People ask, why does such a place still exist in the middle of a modern metropolis? Why have countless intervention projects failed? And why has this scene gradually become normal? Prepare yourself, because what is about to appear before your eyes is not a fictional film set, but Skid Row, the dark side most residents of Los Angeles refuse to face. Just a few miles from Hollywood's dazzling billboards, Skid Row emerges as a parallel world where the light of fame never reaches. On cracked sidewalks, rows of fragile tents huddle together, patched from tattered plastic sheets, frayed cardboard boxes, and dirt-stained cloth. At night, the wind seeps through the gaps, making the tents shiver like the weary breaths of an entire forgotten community. According to 2024 statistics, 1 out of every 5 homeless people in Los Angeles resides in Skid Row. When winter arrives, shelters operate at more than 90% capacity, yet still cannot accommodate all. Thus, a cycle of survival forms: free food distribution points surrounded by long lines of people waiting, ambulances idling at street corners, while the makeshift camps gradually become permanent addresses for thousands. Authorities have organized cleanup and relocation drives many times, yet only weeks later Skid Row resurfaces like grass after rain. A painful question arises: how can a city with world-class healthcare, modern education, and advanced infrastructure remain powerless before just a few dozen city blocks? By the end of 2024, emergency cases here had risen by 18%, mostly from drug overdoses, fainting, or exhaustion. Many streets must be prioritized for cleaning each morning, as layers of needles and trash accumulate like the remnants of an invisible battlefield the night before, especially near bus stops and abandoned schools now reduced to memories. In the eyes of the entire city, Skid Row is a mirror reflecting a society that has lost its ability to self-correct, where the repetition of human tragedy has become a daily routine. There was a time when Skid Row was not a symbol of despair, but instead the vibrant heartbeat of Los Angeles' industrial machine. In the early 20th century, as the world turned its gaze toward the American West, Los Angeles shone as a young yet dynamic hub of commerce and industry. Bustling ports saw cargo ships come and go, railroads stretched to the Midwest, new highways curled around the city. Workers poured in from everywhere, cheap boarding houses sprang up, and Skid Row became the lodging ground for the working class, a stopover on the journey toward the American dream. But the wheels of history never ceased turning. After the 1950s, automation and globalization gradually erased small-scale factories, leaving thousands unemployed. From 1970 to 1985, businesses collapsed one after another, leaving behind rusty frameworks, abandoned buildings with shattered windows and peeling walls. Public services withered. Libraries closed, schools relocated, clinics struggled with only a handful of staff. By the late 1990s, Skid Row had slid deep into darkness. Meanwhile, just blocks away, downtown LA blazed with steel and glass skyscrapers, while Beverly Hills maintained its luxury. The gap between rich and poor became stark, like a gash running through the city's heart. Los Angeles was compared to a splendid painting, but with its left corner smeared in ink, blackened and avoided by all, and that corner was Skid Row. One reform policy followed another, but instead of healing, they inadvertently deepened the cracks. Selective investments poured into wealthy neighborhoods, while Skid Row was left with only the broken remnants. The social support system gradually collapsed. For many, this place ceased to be a temporary district and became a whirlpool with no way out. The decline of Skid Row did not come from a sudden event, but from a long, smoldering chain, a process of slow bleeding. And it is precisely that quiet erosion that is most frightening. It shows how a society can accept abandoning an entire community, just steps away from its glittering center, and still consider it normal. When night falls on Skid Row, neon lights from afar blur into faint streaks, insufficient to cover the haunting scene. Bodies scattered along the sidewalks, motionless for hours after an overdose. In the air heavy with the stench of garbage and cheap cigarettes, death seems to lurk at every corner, waiting to swallow those one step weaker. From 2015 to 2024, fentanyl-related deaths in Los Angeles doubled. Skid Row, home to so many with no anchor left, became the epicenter of the crisis. In 2023 alone, more than 1,200 deaths were recorded, 80% of which began with an emergency call and ended with a death certificate. More dangerously, since 2022, xylazine, a veterinary tranquilizer, has seeped into street drug supplies. Mixed with fentanyl, it drives blood pressure down, stops the heart, and leaves behind living statues collapsed lifelessly on the ground. Police and paramedics are forced to patrol the area at least once every 4 hours, but in reality, it is never enough. Just a few hundred meters walk around Skid Row, one easily encounters discarded needles, the trembling hands of an addict searching for a vein, or empty eyes staring into nothingness. A hit costs only $5 here, cheaper than a fast food meal, and that very cheapness drags many down an abyss with no way back. The trend of polysubstance use since 2021 has made everything worse. Methamphetamine, fentanyl, xylazine, all mixing inside bodies already weakened. They wander in a half-conscious daze, emaciated, with festering wounds that never heal due to lack of nutrition and hygiene. Infections, necrosis, even limb loss have become everyday occurrences in Skid Row. And so, here, the line between emergency and everyday blurs. What once shocked now draws only numb stares. Someone collapsing on the sidewalk, an ambulance siren wailing, a crowd quietly dispersing before quickly resuming their business, as if it were just another inevitable part of daily life. Skid Row, caught in the vortex of drugs and despair, has slipped beyond all attempts at control. It has become living proof of a society willing to let thousands of lives fade into oblivion, just steps away from gleaming skyscrapers. By day, Skid Row resembles a market with no signs. No stalls, no advertisements. Every transaction happens quietly at street corners, under crumbling awnings, or directly on cracked sidewalks. An old lighter, a pair of worn shoes, a few cheap cigarettes, a scrap of leftover food. All can become goods for exchange. And somewhere, the tiny packet of white powder, no bigger than a fingertip, is the most powerful currency of all in this land. Deals are quick and wordless, no receipts, no paperwork. The giver and the receiver, seconds later, melt back into the crowd. Though city officials reported an average of more than 500 interventions per year between 2021 and 2023, the real number is certainly far higher, as no one can account for the countless small trades hidden in every alleyway. In Skid Row, what is called informal is not the exception, it is the rhythm of life. People remain here not only because of addiction, but because Skid Row provides the most basic needs, a place to sleep, some food, essential items they cannot obtain elsewhere. Ironically, misery itself creates a unique supply chain, sustaining the circle of dependency. According to recent surveys, up to 65% of transactions here involve hard stimulants, and more than half of those contain fentanyl. A community trapped by its own destructive habits, sinking deeper into an invisible snare. The frightening part is not the existence of these informal chains, but the fact that they exist right in the heart of a tightly regulated metropolis. Just a few streets away, people walk into a convenience store to spend $5 on a cup of coffee, while in Skid Row, that same amount can buy a dose of drugs strong enough to knock a body out for hours. Two parallel worlds, only steps apart, yet governed by two entirely different sets of rules. Skid Row exists not in spite of oversight, but precisely because of the overlap of too many issues: poverty, inequality, unemployment, and gaps in public policy. At this boundary, the law seems like a fading coat of paint, while unwritten rules shape daily life. A society within society, distorted, irregular, yet enduring like a wound that never heals in Los Angeles. Skid Row is not devoid of police presence. On the contrary, it has a patrol rate 30% higher than the city average. Patrol cars with flashing red and blue lights weave through every alley. Police boots leave heavy imprints on trash-strewn sidewalks. But such presence is not enough to hold order, like trying to patch a cracked dam with a strip of tape. Every day, emergency hotlines receive between 80 and 100 calls linked to Skid Row. Fights over an old blanket, a failed robbery, a body collapsing from an overdose, or screams tearing through the night. Patrol officers know every hotspot so well they can call them by name. The street corner where syringes pile up, the bus stop lined with people curled up asleep, the abandoned building turned into a makeshift shelter. And yet, each intervention ends the same way. Small arrests followed by release after 48 hours for lack of evidence, lack of space, lack of a system to keep them within the law. With no alternative housing, no compulsory treatment measures, these people return to the very spot they were taken from, as if every effort is only an endless circle. This helplessness does not come only from law enforcement. It exposes deep fractures across the entire system. Police can clean up a street corner, but they cannot sweep away hunger, addiction, or the instability clinging to those who live in Skid Row. They can dismantle a group of tents, but days later, those tents rise again like weeds that cannot be uprooted. Ironically, the patrol officers themselves become unwilling witnesses to a tragedy that repeats daily, to see, to intervene, and then to watch, powerless, as it happens again. In the eyes of many, police are symbols of power, but in Skid Row, they stand like gatekeepers before a social storm, one they cannot stop. And so, Skid Row is not just a story of drugs, poverty, or homelessness. It is also the story of a society in which even the force considered the strongest, the police, must bow their heads in acknowledgement of helplessness before a spiral of crisis beyond control. For more than a decade, Los Angeles has pursued the housing-first policy, an idea seemingly humane. Give the homeless a roof first, then address recovery, employment, or therapy. But the ideal on paper has collided with the harsh reality of Skid Row. Only 28% of the homeless here have ever accessed the program, a number far too small compared to the thousands camping on sidewalks. The reason is brutally simple: not enough funds, not enough houses, and far too much bureaucracy. In the winter of 2024, shelters reached 95% capacity, beds pressed tightly together, long lines of people waiting for a chance to sleep under a roof. When space ran out, they returned to the sidewalks. And so, the vicious cycle repeats: cleanups, relocations, then reoccupation. Sanitation campaigns last 3 to 5 days, but within 2 weeks, 70% of the tents return as though they had never disappeared. The frightening thing is not the existence of these informal chains, but the fact that they exist right in the middle of a strictly regulated metropolis. Just a few streets away, people walk into a convenience store to spend $5 on a cup of coffee, while in Skid Row, that same amount can buy a dose of drug strong enough to knock a body out for hours. Two parallel worlds, only steps apart, yet run by two entirely different sets of rules. Skid Row exists not in spite of surveillance, but precisely because of the overlap of too many issues: poverty, inequality, unemployment, and gaps in public policy. At this boundary, the law seems no more than a fading coat of paint, while unwritten rules are what truly shape daily life. A society within society, distorted, irregular, yet enduring like a wound that never heals in Los Angeles. Skid Row is not lacking the presence of police. On the contrary, it has a patrol rate 30% higher than the city average. Patrol cars with flashing red and blue lights weave through every alley. Police boots leave heavy imprints on trash-stained sidewalks. But such presence is not enough to hold order, like trying to patch a cracked dam with a thin strip of tape. Every day, the emergency hotlines receive between 80 and 100 calls related to Skid Row. A fight over an old blanket, a failed robbery, a body collapsing from an overdose, or screams tearing through the night. Patrol officers know every hotspot so well they can call them by name. The street corner where needles pile up, the bus stop lined with people curled up asleep, the abandoned building turned into a temporary shelter. And yet, each intervention ends the same way: small arrests followed by release after 48 hours due to lack of evidence, lack of jail space, and lack of a system to keep them within the bounds of the law. With no replacement housing, no compulsory treatment measures, these people return to the very place they were taken from, as if every effort were just an endless circle. This helplessness does not stem only from law enforcement. It exposes deep cracks throughout the entire system. Police can clean up a street corner, but they cannot sweep away hunger, addiction, or the instability gripping those who live in Skid Row. They can dismantle a group of tents, but within days, those tents rise again, like weeds that cannot be uprooted. Ironically, patrol officers themselves become unwilling witnesses to a tragedy that repeats daily. They see it, intervene, and then helplessly watch it happen again. In the eyes of many, police are symbols of power, but in Skid Row, they take on the role of gatekeepers standing before a social storm, a storm they cannot stop. And thus, Skid Row is not only a story of drugs, poverty, or homelessness. It is also the story of a society in which even the force considered the strongest, the police, must bow their heads in recognition of their helplessness before a spiral of crisis that has spun out of control. For more than a decade, Los Angeles has pursued the housing-first policy, an idea seemingly humane. Give the homeless a roof first, then think about recovery, work, or therapy. But the ideal on paper has clashed with the harsh reality of Skid Row. Only 28% of the homeless here have ever accessed the program, a figure far too small compared to the thousands camping on the streets. The reason is brutally simple: not enough funding, not enough housing, and too much bureaucracy. In the winter of 2024, shelters reached 95% capacity, beds pressed tightly together, long lines of people waiting for the chance to sleep under a roof. When space ran out, they returned to the sidewalks. And so, the vicious cycle repeats: cleanups, relocations, then reoccupation. Sanitation campaigns last 3 to 5 days, but within 2 weeks, 70% of the tents return as though they had never disappeared. Support centers for adolescents around Skid Row are always overwhelmed. Small beds lined up close together, long queues of kids waiting their turn for counseling, for a shower, or simply for a meal with proper nutrition. The 12 to 16 age group is especially vulnerable, just stepping into the formative years of personality, yet already being pulled into temptations and dangers right outside the shelter's doors. For many, the school of the streets is harsher than any classroom. The heartbreaking question arises: if children grow up with the streets as their home, with syringes and trash as their familiar landscape, where will their future lead? How many dreams are buried before they even have a chance to sprout? Skid Row is not only the tragedy of adults who have fallen, but also a mirror reflecting a generation stripped of the chance at a normal life. For in the eyes of Skid Row's children, one sees not only weariness, but also a warning. If society continues to turn its back, today's children will become the permanent residents of tomorrow's tattered tents. Skid Row is not the only example. In San Francisco, the Tenderloin district is also crowded with tents, syringes, and bodies slumped against sidewalks. In Vancouver, the downtown east side once plunged into a similar crisis. But instead of letting the tide of life sweep everything away, that city opened a supervised drug use facility where addicts could use in safe conditions under medical oversight. The result: overdose rates dropped by 35%, a testament that compassion can sometimes be the most effective solution. San Francisco experimented with tiny homes, small, temporary houses, just enough for a person to regain a sense of privacy, a door to lock, a roof that doesn't leak. Despite heavy criticism, this model still offered hope to those weary of life on the streets. Meanwhile, Los Angeles chose to build permanent housing complexes combined with treatment, but progress has been bogged down by red tape and enormous costs. The result: by the time one building is completed, the homeless population has already grown by thousands. This comparison reveals budgets are not the only key. What matters is the approach, choosing between control or compassion, between investing in concrete or investing in people. And that is the crossroads where Los Angeles must find the courage to choose. Amid the faded rows of tents, there are still places called Islands of Hope, harm reduction centers in Skid Row. Each day, as many as 300 people come through their doors. They don't just need bandages, medicine, or clean syringes. They need something less tangible: the feeling of being heard, of being called by name, of being treated as human. A frail man once said, "Here, at least they look me in the eye, instead of avoiding me like on the street." In fact, up to 60% of Skid Row's residents have not accessed any formal services outside the area in the past 3 months. That reality makes these small community organizations the only anchor. They hand out food, tend to wounds, and most importantly, provide human presence in a space where official systems have nearly withdrawn. Stories from inside Skid Row echo as reminders. A woman who lost everything to domestic violence now finds shelter and the chance to learn a trade through a non-profit program. A young man newly sober shares that this place gives him a reason to wake up each morning. These rays of light are small, but they preserve humanity in a brutal reality. The greatest meaning of these voices from within is their affirmation. When formal systems fail, the informal networks step in. They do not just patch wounds, they preserve the belief that a community of fragile, makeshift as it may be, can still uphold human beings. And that is the message Los Angeles must hear. The solution is not only about budget numbers, but first about recognizing the homeless as people worthy of dignity. In the middle of Skid Row, where streets overflow with trash, tents, and needles, there still exist small spaces people call islands of hope. These are harm reduction centers, rooms still lit when the rest of the district falls into darkness. Each day, as many as 300 people come not only for a meal or medical bandages. They come for a rarer, simpler reason. There, they are called by name, looked in the eye, and regarded as human beings of value. A middle-aged man, thin and frail, said, "Out there, when I fall, people step aside. But here, at least they bend down to help me up." A woman who had once been a victim of domestic violence shared that the shelter of a nonprofit gave her not only a temporary roof, but also the chance to learn a trade and start again. A young man newly out of addiction confessed that it was the volunteers here who gave him a reason to wake up each morning, even though countless hardships still lay ahead. In reality, up to 60% of Skid Row's residents have not accessed any formal services outside the area for the past 3 months. That fact makes these small community organizations the only lifeline. They distribute food, provide first aid, hand out clean syringes to reduce fatal risks, and most importantly, they create a space where people are heard. Those makeshift rooms, at times, become the only anchor amid a torn and drifting life. The voices from Skid Row, therefore, are not only cries for help. They are also affirmations. When formal systems retreat, it is the informal networks that step forward to shoulder the burden. They do not have million-dollar budgets or vast bureaucratic machinery, but they have compassion, persistence, and the belief that a community, however fragile, can still preserve dignity for those on the margins. And that is the most powerful message Los Angeles needs to hear. The solution is not just in budget figures, but must begin with seeing and recognizing the homeless as human beings in the fullest sense. Not every destination in Los Angeles shines with the lights of Hollywood, and not every journey is wrapped in glamour and dreams. Skid Row is living proof that alongside luxurious boulevards, there exist harsh corners where the American dream shatters into thousands of fragments, scattered across sidewalks filled with trash, syringes, and faded tents. Passing through Skid Row, one does not only see abandoned lives, but also the reflection of an entire society. A wealthy society with skyscrapers and vast budgets, yet powerless to provide each person with a safe home. There, Hollywood's glow cannot erase human darkness. The glamour of award ceremonies cannot cover the despair of thousands sleeping on the streets. Skid Row reminds us that poverty, addiction, and homelessness are not normal. Every tent, every hopeless gaze, every child waiting in line for food is a question hurled at the system. Where did we go wrong? And why has indifference been quietly accepted as part of modern urban life? This channel chooses not to look away, not to sugarcoat. Because only when we face the brutal truth can change begin. Skid Row is not a movie scene, but real life where every day, people struggle to hold on to dignity. If you believe stories like this need to be told, please share, comment, and subscribe. Every small action you take not only helps spread the message, but also brings the forgotten voices closer to the world. And perhaps, through empathy, through care, we may together find a way out not just for Skid Row, but for all the cities slowly sinking into darkness.